Bethel, good to see everybody today. Good to be sitting in a colder room than out in the heat. But I'm glad that you've chosen to join us today. I'm glad that you've taken time out of your Sunday morning. You could be sleeping in, you could be doing other things, but we're glad that you're here. We're glad that you've joined us, and we look forward to what God wants to do this morning, what He's been doing in your hearts, what He's hoping to do in your hearts, and so my prayer is that when we leave through those doors, each of us, we would be different than when we came in. And I hope that's your prayer too. I hope that's your hope as well, that you anticipate and you expect and you look forward to God teaching you and challenging you and pushing you and changing you. And that's really our goal here at Bethel. Our goal is to help you know God better and to serve God better with your life. And so I'm convinced that each one of us has a step that we can take this morning, and that if we just listen to God through songs, through prayer, through His Word, that He'll help us take that step. I'd encourage you, just like Pastor Jerry did, if you would use those communication cards. On the back of it, put down any comments or questions or thoughts that you might have, prayer requests. We look them over every Monday, and you'll notice on the backside too, there's a box, and Pastor Jerry mentioned that we want to be able to help other people pray for you. There's a box on the back at the bottom that says, I want this to be added to the prayer list, and if you don't check that box, we don't put your prayer request on the list. We do if you check that box. And so we just want to make sure that you know what we're doing with your information. But Pastor Jerry and I, we pray over those things every Monday. We go through those cards and talk about the concerns that you have, the questions or the thoughts that you might have. And so it makes a big deal for us if you use those. And then put them in the basket when we pass by the morning offering. And we really, really appreciate that. It makes a big difference for us. The other thing I want to mention, I mentioned it last week and I'll mention it again because I don't want you to forget, is that August 10th we have our annual block party from 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock. It's a Saturday, and we're looking forward to it. We're excited about it. We've got everything lined up except for you. And so we need you to come. We need your help. We need you to help us reach our community, reach our neighbors, put on a friendly face. Some of you, it's harder than others, I understand, especially when it's hot like me. I get grumpy in the heat, which is why I'm in the dunk tank, because it's a lot cooler there and it feels better. But we need your help. Whatever you can do to help us with that block party setup, run a game. You don't have to be skilled to do those things. We're looking for unskilled workers, which if you're like me, that's all of us, right? But we could really appreciate it. The other thing that we really want to do, though, as we mentioned before, is we want to be generous. And I would love your help in doing that. And so we're challenging you and asking you to buy a gift card from a restaurant or from a gas station, whatever it might be, $10, $25, $50, whatever you feel compelled to give. And then there's a box on the information desk. You might have seen it when you came through. There's a box there. If you would put those gift cards in that box, when we get to the block party on that Saturday, we're going to have people fill out a card and register on their way in. And then we're just going to start drawing random cards and giving those away and being generous to our neighbors and our community. And I love doing it. It's one of my favorite things about the block party. I know you probably thought my favorite thing was like the big slide, the inflatable slide. It's not. I love giving away those gift cards, and I love that we get to do that together. That each of those gift cards represents you, represents this church, represents our love for our community and our generosity. And so I'd invite you for the next couple weeks, go stop by when you're at the store and you're picking something up from Walmart, grab a gift card too. And put it in that box and help us bless our neighbors and bless our community. And then nobody knows who gave the gift cards. And so then you can come, you can run a game, and you can listen as we call out which gift cards are being given away, and you can know, hey, that was mine. And somebody just walked away with my gift card, and see the smile on their face and the excitement as they do that. Or you can just ride the big slide the whole time if you want to do that too. But please help us out August 10th. I'm going to be sending out another email this week to remind you to volunteer. If you haven't yet, you can email me, call me, write it on your communication card that you want to help out. A number of you already have. And so we look forward to partnering with you in that. We're in the middle of a series here in this summer in Proverbs. And the series that we're working through, A Wise Man Once Said, is really all about finding the practical advice and the truth that's necessary to help us as Christians navigate life and navigate life's situations, the tricky situations, in a godly way. We want to develop godly life skill. And that should be our desire. If we're followers of Christ, if we call ourselves Christians and we worship God, then our desire really should be to go through life when situations and issues and difficulties come up and know that we're able to handle them in godly ways, to handle them to the best of our ability, to do life. We talked about this at the beginning of the series, to do life well. And that a lot of times we don't feel like we're good at life. But this series is trying to help us get a little bit better at life, meaning live a godly life, have godly life skill. That's the purpose of this Old Testament book, Proverbs. And so that's where we're going to look again this morning. We're going to be in Proverbs chapter 20, verse 3. If you want to turn there to get ready for what we're looking at this morning. Proverbs 20, verse 3. If you grab one of the Bibles from the back, from the tan Bibles, it's going to be page 843, but from the dark brown Bibles, it's page 558. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 3. We want to walk away this morning, though. We want to walk away from this summer with a full toolbox to help us better handle the various aspects of life. Like the truth that we talked about last week, that if we're making a choice out of a genuine love for God and out of a desire to pursue Him, a pursuit of Him, then we can be confident in our decision when there's two choices in front of us and we don't know which one is the best choice, and we don't want to make the wrong choice. As long as we're pursuing God and acting out of a love for Him, a desire to satisfy Him, then we can't really choose wrong. And that's a tool for us to take away and help us when we face those situations. We can be confident in our decisions. And this week is going to be no different, I hope, in its terms of practicality and applicability. And so I hope that you will be able to walk away this morning with another tool in your toolbox to live a godly life. I don't know if I'm sure you have, we all have. We've all met somebody, maybe we are this person. If you are, don't admit it out loud, but we've all met somebody that just seems to love a good fight, love a good argument, right? Like they just want to be right. It doesn't even matter what it is. It doesn't matter what it's about. They just can't handle being wrong, right? And so they're the kind of person where if you were to say the sky is blue, they'd be like, you know what, not today, because clouds and it's gray, right? So it's not blue. That's not the color of the sky. Like we all have met those people that they just seem like they love a good fight. They love a good argument. I have had some really stupid arguments myself. And maybe I am that person a little bit, where I have a hard time being wrong, and I want to make sure that I'm right. But there have been times, to be honest with you, with occasions where I find that I'm actually arguing about why I was arguing. Right? You get so far down that road with an argument or a fight, you don't remember what you were arguing about, or you come to the conclusion, but then you argue about why you were arguing, right? Or what your argument was. Like, no, this is what I was saying. But you've already resolved, like, we argue about really dumb things. I was listening to my boys. If you want to hear dumb arguments, just listen to like a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. And I feel bad. When Titus is like 13, I'm going to have to stop using him as an illustration. But I was sitting there listening to him the other day, and Carter had this little toy bird, and he was convinced and confident that the bird that he had was a peahawk. Like, he kept telling Ty, this is a peahawk. And I didn't have the heart to tell Carter that's not even a bird. But his reasoning was sound. His reasoning was solid because the bird looked like it had a pea in his mouth. And so he figured there's a pea in the mouth, it looks like a hawk, it's got to be a peahawk. Titus is convinced, no, he's like, Carter, that's not a peahawk, it's a parrot. And they probably went at it for a long time. And I didn't want to be that guy, but it's a toucan. It was definitely a toucan. It wasn't a peahawk and it wasn't a parrot. But I didn't want to, you know what I mean? I didn't want to be that guy to argue with a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old about what it was. But I felt it inside me, like something saying, like, tell them they're wrong. You know, and that, I don't know if that's you sometimes, where you feel like, man, you got to be right. You have that argument, but we have some really stupid arguments sometimes, don't we? We fight over the dumbest things, and then it's really hard to admit afterwards, like, why is this even an issue? I know you have, because I have, and there have been too many times that I found myself thinking or even saying afterwards, after a few minutes, why are we even fighting? What are we even arguing about? You forget it in the midst of the whole thing, right? You forget what the argument was about. And the truth is, what we're going to see this morning too, is that most of the things that we fight about and that we argue about really aren't worth it. They really aren't worth the effort, the relational distress. They're not worth fighting about. They're not worth arguing about. We might think they are sometimes, and in the moment we probably are convinced that they are. But what I think we're going to see this morning is that most of our fights not only can be, but most of our fights should be avoided. Most of them can be, and most of them should be avoided. In fact, I would say this, that if we want to live a successful, godly life, then we need to learn when to walk away from a disagreement. If we want to live a successful and godly life, then we need to develop this life skill, knowing when to walk away from a disagreement. And I'll say this too, I am not good at this. I am not. I think I've probably said that the last number of weeks, right? That if this is going straight to your heart, this has been at my heart all week long. I am not good at this, and so don't think that I'm telling you something I've figured out. But the foundation for this life skill of knowing when to walk away from an argument, the foundation for it is here in Proverbs chapter 20, verse 3. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 3 says this. Says that it is to one's honor to avoid strife, but every fool is quick to quarrel. I also found out this week that quarrel is a hard word to say after a while. You see, you hear it so many times and it sounds wrong, right? And then you say it out loud and you think, I don't think I'm saying that right. But anyway, that's beside the point. But verse 3, it is to one's honor to avoid strife, but every fool is quick to quarrel. So there's typically a progression in our relational conflicts. And maybe you'll recognize this, that usually they start with a disagreement, right? There's a disagreement which quickly can turn into an argument. The disagreement turns into an argument, which the argument can turn into a fight. That's kind of the progression, right? Disagreement, and then argument, and then it's a full-blown fight. Disagreements are common, right? Disagreement is just where there's a difference in our opinions, there's a difference in our thoughts, where we just see things from a different perspective, right? You want the toilet paper to roll down in the front, and someone else wants the toilet paper to roll down in the back. It's just a disagreement. We just see it differently, right? I don't know why you would want it to roll down in the back, but again, we don't want to escalate this. I'm just saying. But that's a disagreement, right? And you're thinking, yeah, but the back makes more sense because then, I don't know why, it's closer to the wall, or I don't know. Disagreements are common. We disagree on a lot of things, right? And that's okay. Disagreements are common. It's just where there's a difference in opinion, there's a difference in thought. But an argument is when we take our disagreement, or that differing opinion, or that different thought, and then we attempt to convince the other person, or change the other person's opinions or thoughts to match our own. Right? That's what an argument really is at its core. We have a disagreement. Hey, I noticed that we disagree on whether the Bills or the Steelers are better. Right? This year it might be the Browns, which would be worse for everybody. No offense to any Browns fans out there. But we disagree. But an argument is where I try to convince you to see things my way, right? Or to change your opinion or your thoughts to match my own. That's also not always bad. There are times when an argument to try to convince someone of changing their perspective, that is sometimes necessary. But it's also, there are times when it is bad, right? So that's when we start walking this fine line. We go from a disagreement to an argument, but then a fight is when our arguments become entrenched. When our arguments we become obstinate, we become stubborn, and our argument is now a battle that we're trying to win. Right? That's a fight. That's when our argument escalates into a battle where we've got to win. Right? It doesn't matter how I win now. I just need to win this argument. That's a fight. And we each have our own preferred tactics when we reach that point. When we go from argument to fight, we have our own preferred ways of winning that battle. In our attempts to convince, in this fight now, we get personal. We bring up things from the past. We insult. We bring up wrongs that maybe are similar or give us reasons why we shouldn't give in, right? That we think, or we go beyond trying to just convince and we yell, right? We get angry and we yell. Sometimes we get passive aggressive with the fight. Sometimes we ignore, right? And we just stop and we shut the person out. But that disagreement That conflict has gone beyond just disagreeing. It's beyond arguing, and now it's a battle that we, in some ways, feel like we have to win. That we are entrenched because of our pride, maybe, because of our stubbornness. And what you see, though, in Proverbs chapter 20 verse 3, in Proverbs chapter 20, verse 3, you see the escalation of an argument into a fight. That's what Proverbs chapter 20, verse 3 is talking about. It uses the word strife and quarrel. That's the escalation of an argument where we're just trying to convince into a fight. Strife, that word there, strife, is beyond a disagreement. Strife is like the highest level of an argument, which is turning into a battle. We're becoming entrenched, we're becoming stubborn, we're becoming proud. We don't want to give in. And it's becoming a battle. And the author says here in chapter 20, verse 3, that it is to our honor, at the beginning there, to avoid strife, to avoid when our disagreements become a fight. It is to our honor to avoid that. And like I said before, if we want to live a successful godly life, then we need to learn when to walk away from a disagreement so it doesn't become strife. It doesn't become that escalated argument into a fight. And I said this, but what we're going to see, I think, is that most of our fights should be avoided and can be avoided. Proverbs chapter 17, verse 14 says this. It's such a clear picture. It says that starting a quarrel, escalating to that point, is like breaching a dam. So drop the matter before the dispute breaks out. And that word dispute means battle. It's like breaching a dam, like chipping away at it until that water starts shooting out, right? The next thing you know, it's a full-blown battle. Escalating a disagreement or an argument to the point where it's a fight isn't a good thing. So drop it before it becomes that big. It's a godly life skill to recognize when an argument is escalating and to end it before it becomes a battle. This is not easy. This is hard. But it's also a skill if we want to live a godly life. It doesn't mean that we don't ever disagree. That's not what this means. It doesn't mean that we don't ever disagree. And it doesn't mean that we never argue, meaning try to convince somebody to see things a different way. In fact, we're going to see that there are times when we will have to disagree, and we're going to see that there are times when we maybe have to argue, but it is to our honor to avoid strife. It is to our honor to avoid unhealthy escalation of disagreements. And, verse 3, the second half, we are fools if our disagreements become battles. A fool is quick to quarrel. A fool lets it escalate into a battle. So the question is, how do we know then? How do we know when to end the argument? How do we know when to walk away? When should you walk away? How do we avoid strife and prevent fighting in our conflicts? So when should you walk away? There's a few things that I think that we need to consider in the check as we're working through our disagreements that will help us see, I need to stop this now. I need to walk away before this becomes a battle. I need to walk away before this becomes anything more than it is. And so the first thing that we need to do is we need to know our motives. When we're disagreeing with someone, we need to recognize and identify our motives. We must develop the ability to recognize what's driving this disagreement for us and then drop it before our wrong motives turn it into a battle. Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4 helps us with this. It says that we shouldn't do anything out of a selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above ourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you need to look to the interests of the others. But it's that first sentence there that we shouldn't do anything out of a selfish ambition or vain conceit. This gives us a perfect filter to know when to drop a disagreement, when it's not worth arguing. It's not worth escalating to strife or into fighting. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. And so if my motive in a disagreement, if my intent is selfish in any way, then I need to drop it. I need to drop it. If my motive is selfish, I should do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. And so in a disagreement, if I sense and I can tell, this isn't just like a friendly, Bills are better than Steelers kind of a thing. If I can tell my motives are selfish, I need to drop it. I need to drop it, and I need to walk away from the disagreement. It's not worth it. If I just want to be right, it's selfish, right? Drop it. If this disagreement is just about me wanting to be right, drop it. If I'm just being stubborn because it irritates me that someone doesn't think the way that I do, that's selfish. Drop it. Or even if I just want them to be wrong because I like to be right, I want, drop it. It's hard. This is hard, but we're supposed to do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. If my motive is to make it clear that I'm better or that I'm smarter, I need to drop it. I need to drop it, and I need to back down. Don't do anything out of vain conceit, out of vanity. If we notice that our disagreement has become an argument just because I want to be right, then I need to do the hard thing, and I need to walk away, and I need to stop making my point, because I'm only making it out of selfish desire to be right. Or sometimes I need to be willing to be wrong, or, and this is so hard, I need to be willing and be okay that they might think I'm wrong, even if I know I'm right. Because if my point and my motive is to prove that I'm right, just to be right, it's selfish. It's selfish ambition, and I need to walk away. And sometimes that means I need to be okay that other people might think I'm wrong. That's a hard one for me. I like to be right. I like to be right. It's hard. Trying to convince people to see things my way out of selfishness or vanity, out of needing to be right, will absolutely lead to strife. They will absolutely lead to a fight or a battle. It is a godly life skill to recognize my motives and to stop the conflict when I can tell this is purely out of selfish ambition. I'm disagreeing and escalating this simply out of vain conceit because I can't handle being wrong. Because I want them to be wrong. I'm being selfish with this. And it's a godly life skill to recognize that and stop it before it escalates. For example, this means that there is almost no reason to argue over someone else's mistakes. What could possibly be your motive in pointing out someone else's mistakes? You did this wrong because. You didn't do this the right way because. There are some times maybe, but nearly every time, at least I know, pointing out someone else's mistake is just because I like being right. And there's no reason to argue over those things. Because the majority of the time, the only reason we're pointing out that mistake or bringing it up is because we want them to know we're better or we're smarter or they're not good enough. And so as much as I want to, I just got to walk away from it. They don't need to know that I was right. And it's hard. It's almost always from selfish ambition or vain conceit, and it will always escalate to a conflict and start a fight. It'll always become strife. And it is to our honor to avoid that, which means I have to walk away, even if it means not proving that I was right, even if it means that they think they were right when I know they were wrong. If it's selfish, I have to walk away. When was the last time someone came at you with a mistake and you didn't suddenly feel defensive and combative and try to save face? And then you've turned it into a fight too, because now you have vain conceit because they've pointed out a mistake to you, and now you can't handle that because of your vanity and because of your selfishness, and so now you turn it into and you escalate it too, and we're fools. And we're fools. And that brings up another example. This means that sometimes in a disagreement, I have to let people think I'm wrong, right? Even when I'm right, I have to let them think I'm wrong, and that's hard. I have to let them think that I'm wrong. I need to be willing to admit when I was wrong and not justify or explain it out of vanity. That's hard too in a disagreement. To admit, you know what, I was wrong, and not say but. Right? That's hard. To just say, I was wrong. I was wrong, and leave it at that. It's nearly always from selfish ambition or vain conceit to justify yourself, to defend yourself, and it will start a fight. You know it will. You know it does. It doesn't end things. When someone says you're wrong and you say, I know I was wrong, but this is why. How quickly do our arguments end when we're willing to just say, I was wrong? Or when we're willing to just try not to defend or justify, or we're willing to let someone else think that they were right? It's done. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. And if you sense those things in your motives, then you need to drop it in order to avoid strife and prevent fighting. Just say, I'm realizing this is actually more my issue than anything else. And I'm sorry that I'm pressing this disagreement. This is actually more me than it is anything else. Can we just stop? I wish I used those words more often. But it is to my honor to avoid strife and to just let it go before the dam breaches into a battle. So we need to know our motives, right? We should walk away. We should walk away when we know our motives are selfish. The second thing that we need to do is recognize what are genuine issues and what are not genuine issues. Most of our disagreements that turn into arguments or turn into fights are over things that honestly don't matter at all. It's not worth it. And when Paul is giving advice to Timothy, he writes in his second letter, he writes this in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 23. He says, it's so blunt too. It hurts my feelings when I read this. My name's in there too. Don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments because you know they produce quarrels. I don't know how you can say it any more bluntly. Timothy, don't get involved in foolish and stupid arguments because they start fights. Don't have anything to do with those things. Most of our arguments fall under the category of foolish and stupid. In fact, it is much easier to list the disagreements that we have that don't fall into that category. Right? There's only a couple types of disagreements that don't fall into foolish and stupid. We can make a long list of things that we argue about that are foolish and stupid, but the list for things that aren't, that we are allowed to, that won't maybe start quarrels, is much shorter. That won't become foolish or stupid arguments that lead to fighting. In the same letter, earlier in the same chapter, Paul tells Timothy to warn people of this. He says, don't warn them not fighting about words. It's chapter 2, verse 14. Keep reminding God's people of these things. Warn them before God against quarreling, that's that fight, that's that battle, about words. It's of no value and it only ruins those who listen. And this is interesting. So this may sound confusing for a moment, so you have to put on your thinking caps for a moment and just try to track with me because I'm going to use a word multiple times. You'll get it. So this word, words, the word word, is not the normal word for word. So the word that he uses there is not your normal. This is only used one time in the New Testament, and it's right here. It's not the normal word for words. It's the only time it's used, and this word for words means trifling ideas, things without depth. It doesn't actually mean one specific word. It means concepts, things that are surface level, no depth to them. It says, tell people to stop arguing about things that have no depth, about trifling issues that are only surface level. To paraphrase, what he's saying is, tell them not to fight about things that have no spiritual importance. This list is much shorter. There's a long list of foolish and stupid things that we can fight about, and there's a very short list about things that we should disagree on or even argue about sometimes. But he tells them, stop fighting about things that have no spiritual importance. We have to recognize what the genuine issue is. When we should walk away when the issue that we're disagreeing on and it's escalating, we should walk away when it's not spiritually important. When it doesn't matter in eternity. They're just words. It's just surface level. It's just things people say. It's not worth fighting about. This is another great filter to know when to drop that disagreement. We walk away when it is not spiritually important because it doesn't matter in eternity. Does this have any spiritual significance? We can disagree on this, that's great. But if this is escalating, we need to stop and think, does this have any spiritual significance whatsoever? And if the answer is no, then we need to stop. It's okay to disagree. It's not okay to turn this into a fight if it's not spiritually important. Will this disagreement matter in eternity? Will I be glad that we disagreed over it, fought over this, argued over this? Will I be glad that we argued over this in eternity? Most of the time, the answer is going to be no. This has no spiritual significance whatsoever. And if the answer is no, then I need to drop it before it becomes a foolish, stupid battle. So what issues do have spiritual importance? Because if it doesn't have spiritual importance, I need to walk away. So what issues do have spiritual importance? Issues of sin have spiritual importance, and issues of biblical truth have spiritual importance. In those cases, it's not always the right choice to walk away. When the issue is about sin or the issue is about biblical truth, those are spiritually significant disagreements. And there are times when we will have to argue about those things. Those are the only things that will matter in eternity. And even then, we need to be discerning, because Paul warns another protege, other than Timothy. He warns Titus that we shouldn't argue, even if it's a biblical issue, even if it's a biblical issue, we shouldn't fight over legalistic issues in the Bible. Titus chapter 3, verse 9, he says, avoid foolish controversies and genealogies and arguments and quarrels about the law. He said, Titus, avoid legalistic arguments. Avoid these things that are just, they're foolish. That you're adding stuff to the law. You're adding stuff to the scriptures, because those kind of arguments, those controversies, they're unprofitable. They're useless. In Romans chapter 14, Paul says this about the same thing, about those that sometimes we think a biblical issue is something that we've got to fight for. And Paul says this. He says that one person will consider one day more sacred than another. Another considers every day the same, that one day is no different than another. In that case, he's talking about the Sabbath for the Jews. Each of them should be just fully convinced in their own mind that whoever regards one day as special does so to the Lord, that they're convinced that this is going to help me worship God the best. Whoever eats meat does so to the Lord, for they give thanks to God. And whoever abstains, doesn't eat meat, does so to the Lord and give thanks to God. Meaning, there are times when there are biblical issues that we think have to be fought. And Paul says, no, you just need to walk away from it sometimes. Sometimes there are biblical issues that you just say, hey, you know what? We disagree. Don't escalate it into a fight, because it's okay to disagree on some of those things. But there are other things. There are sin issues and there are biblical issues that do matter in eternity, that are spiritually important and are significant. But if it is not spiritually significant, if this is not going to matter in eternity, let's leave it at a disagreement. Let's not turn it into an argument. It is to our honor if we avoid that strife. We are fools if we're quick to quarrel, quick to fight over those things. Most of our disagreements, most of our arguments do not fit into this category. I'm not sure how you could convince me that the way the toilet paper rolls is a spiritually important argument or fight. I know that's a silly one, but there are a lot of things that we argue about and that we fight about, that I argue about and I fight about, that do not pass through this filter. And I need to get better, and we need to get better at just saying, you know what? This isn't a big deal. And just walk away. When you find yourself in conflict, when you find yourself in disagreement or beyond disagreement, when you find yourself in an argument or a fight, think it through. Are we disagreeing over a sin issue? Are we disagreeing over a sin issue? Does the Bible address this? Or is there sin at stake? Is this about a clear biblical truth that must be followed and must be affirmed? If the answer is no, there's no clear sin issue, there's no clear biblical truth at stake, This is not a significant spiritual issue. If it's just opinion, if it's just preference, and there's no depth or eternal significance to it, it's okay to disagree, but we better drop it before it becomes strife, before it becomes an argument, before it becomes a fight. Because it's not to our honor to let those things escalate. It's to our honor to avoid that, and we're fools if we let it become a fight. So just say, as hard as it is, this really isn't that important. I'm sorry I made a big deal about this. And just let it go. It's hard. So, how do we know, right? How do we know when to walk away? We walk away when we realize my motives are selfish here. This is out of selfish ambition. This is out of vain conceit. I need to stop. We walk away when it's not a clear spiritual issue. We walk away. This isn't important. This isn't worth it. We can disagree, but if I notice that, man, I'm starting a fight here, we walk away. This isn't worth it. It's not important. We need to be done. The third way that we know when to walk away is we need to know what our goal is in the disagreement or in a healthy argument. We need to know what our goal is. Romans chapter 12, verse 18 says that if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, you need to live at peace with everyone. If it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with anyone. And so one of our goals, even in our disagreements, is to live at peace. Right? When the issue, when the goal isn't peace, I need to walk away. If the goal here isn't to create peace, or isn't going to create peace and unity between people, then I need to walk away. If it's not necessary to result in peace, then we need to drop it. As far as it depends on us, we are responsible to cultivate peace with everyone. And that means there are a lot of disagreements where I need to realize this is not going to cultivate peace. This is not, or my goal isn't peace in this. My goal isn't to help somehow create a better, peaceful, unified relationship in this argument. I need to stop. Because however possible as it depends on me, my goal should be peace. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 25 and 26. This is so good. Paul says this to Timothy. He says that opponents must be gently instructed, meaning you're disagreeing and you're having an argument, but you're not turning it into strife. You're not turning it into a fight. Why? What's the goal? In the hope that God will grant them repentance, leading them to a knowledge of the truth, that they will come to their senses and escape from the trap of the devil who has taken them captive to do his will. My goal should be peace, or my goal should be restoration, repentance. If that is not my goal in this argument, I need to walk away. If my goal is not to help somebody come to a restoration in their relationship with God or me, if my goal is not to help them come to repentance, then I need to walk away. I need to walk away. If the conflict is over sin or clear biblical truth, then my goal should be to restore that person, restore their heart and restore their mind to God. If it's not, if my goal is condemnation, if my goal is judgment, if my goal is just being right, then I need to drop it and come back when my goal is better. Come back when my motives are less selfish. Come back when it's actually a genuine issue. Our goals in disagreement should be peace and should be restoration. That it should be our goal when we disagree and it's escalating. If that goal is not there, then it is to my honor to avoid that strife. And we are fools if we let disagreement escalate into a fight if our goal isn't peace or restoration. When we sense that, when we see, okay, we're disagreeing, and this is it's escalating into a fight, and I can tell right now my goal isn't peace, and my motive here, my goal here is not to restore this person. Right? My goal is to make them feel as bad as possible about what's going on. Then I need to stop and walk away and just say, you know what? This is not going to help you, and it's not going to help me in our relationship with God or each other. I'm sorry it got to this point. And just walk away. I'm thinking the same thing you are. This is really hard. This is really hard. But if we want to live a successful, godly life, we need to learn and get better at walking away from disagreements before they escalate into an argument. And we can see clearly from the scriptures that we should walk away when our motives are selfish. We should walk away when it's not a spiritual issue, right? When it's not spiritually important, and we should walk away if our goal is not peace or restoration. And it takes a lot of humility to say, we need to stop. This was a disagreement, but this is becoming something more. Does this mean we can't disagree? No, it doesn't mean we can't disagree. We can and we will disagree on all sorts of things. Disagreements are common, disagreements are normal. What it means is that if we want to live a successful, godly life, then we need to learn when we walk away from that disagreement before it becomes more. So unless you're convinced that your motives are unselfish, that the issue is spiritual and the goal is honoring to God, then it is to your honor, it is godly, it is biblical to walk away from the disagreement in order to avoid fights before we start a battle. A couple things to just remember. When we do find that our disagreement, when we do find that, you know what, this is unselfish, this is a significant issue, and if we don't have this argument, then we won't find peace or unity, or we won't find restoration. Because there are moments and there are times when you will check your motives and you'll think, I am not being selfish in this. Right? And this is an important issue. And we need to do this. This has to happen if there's going to be restoration or if there's going to be peace. You might check all those boxes and find that this disagreement does check all the boxes. And if that is true, then we need to remember a few things about that. That one is that God's word tells us how to handle those issues that check all the boxes. God's word shows us how to handle those issues that are unselfish, spiritually important, and necessary for peace or restoration. So when you find yourself, turn to Matthew 18, verses 15 to 17. It will tell you how to handle an issue like that. When you know, okay, I've gone through all three of these filters, and this is an argument we have to have, but I don't want it to turn into a battle, but we have to have the argument. Turn to Matthew 18 and remind yourself, okay, how do I handle when someone's clearly offending me or in sin? Galatians chapter 6, verse 1. There's another place to turn to say, okay, what do I do? How do I do this then? If all these boxes are checked, if all these filters are cleared, how do I handle this argument, this disagreement? Galatians 6:1 was that one. It was Matthew 18, 50 to 17, Galatians 6:1, 2 Timothy 2:25, to handle it in a kind way, to handle it gently, and opponents like you're trying to teach them. 2 Timothy 2:25 is another great verse to turn to before when you know, okay, and remind yourself. Maybe these are even verses we memorize so that in those moments we know how to handle it. But in every disagreement where I've passed that disagreement through all these filters, my motives are not selfish. The issue is clearly spiritual. And we need to do this for the peace and unity of restoration of our hearts and their heart to God. Then be gentle, be humble, and speak the truth in love. Because if this turns into a battle because of me, it's not to my honor. It's to my dishonor that I let it escalate to that point. If we want to live a successful, godly life, then we need to know and learn when to walk away from a disagreement, and if the argument is necessary, how to handle it so it doesn't become a quarrel, because a fool lets things escalate into fights. I have a lot to work on this week. And maybe you do too. My prayer, though, is that we get better at this, that I get better at this, because I want to live a godly life. Would you pray with me? God, thank you for practical advice from your word. Thank you for giving us instruction. And I pray that that even a little bit of this that we will take away and be able to put into use this week, that you'll help us remember some of these verses and remember this instruction and remember this advice and lead us towards a godly life. And the next time that we have a disagreement, we can keep it as a disagreement. And if we sense that it's becoming an unhealthy argument, that we sense that we notice it and that you show it to us and we have the courage and the boldness to just walk away so that we don't let it escalate into an argument that's unhealthy or a fight. I love you, God, for your patience with me. I pray that you give each of us patience with each other and the ability to do this and discern. And I ask all this in your name.